Is Amanda. We are so excited to welcome you here today. I'm here with Paul from Seattle's Holocaust Center for Humanity and Jody and Jenny from the Rowan Center for the Study of Genocide, Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights. Did I get that all right? Yes. We're gonna wait just another minute or two to let people in. In the meantime, if you could introduce yourself to us and Alan in the chat, and if you've been in one of my PDs before, you always know I start with a random question. So this one I have used before, but I haven't met most of you. So it's my favorite. It is, what is the last thing that you ate that made you smile? Very random, has nothing to do with genocide or Holocaust or refugees or anything sad. It's a smile. Tonia's showing me, is that a Skittle or an M&M? It's an M&M. So
M&M.
Someone's currently eating their favorite.
I love everything that's coming in. French fries, Twix, cheese, Emma. Yes, love it.
We're just coming off of Halloween, so it's probably a lot of candy in this list.
Oh, that's what I should have asked is, what's your favorite Halloween candy? Darn it, next time.
That's all right. That's a good question.
We had 2 trick-or-treaters at my house. That was it. It was so sad.
We needed to get a second. We needed to make like during Halloween run to get more candy because we ran out. And it was not from big kids taking giant handfuls. It was, we had a ton. I think it's because last year there was like not a real Halloween.
Oh.
And so kids were making up for it.
Right.
We could have evened out, Amanda, you and I. Like I could have sent you some.
It's all right. My husband ate everything. I was like, you're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, we still have so many people piling in. So for those of you who are just joining, we were introducing ourselves to Alan by saying, what was the last thing that you ate that made you smile? So that's why, you know, if you see like random things, random food coming into the chat,
that's why we're
and you're like,
food.
am I in the right PD
You're in the right
session?
place. This is not a food channel special. That's right.
Full-size candy bars, Amanda. I was thinking about doing that next year for like the lucky 5 kids that came. Yeah. But then I didn't want to be known as the house the year afterwards that gives out the full-size candy bars. Before you know it, I have to buy like
lined up. Well, then you might get more than 2 people.
Right. Okay. Paul, can I put you on duty of letting everybody in while we're just going back and forth? Okay. First things first, if I could ask everybody to please mute themselves, just to make sure that there's no background noise and whatnot. But again, my name is Amanda Coven. I am the Director of Ed at the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. I am so thrilled to be here with all of you tonight and to welcome Alan Gratz to speak here. And I'm so happy that our partners could be here as well with us. I have been waiting for this session for so long, and I don't really want to take up any more time. So in the chat, and I will include this in the post-session email that I send out afterwards, is a Google Doc to all of the different learning opportunities that we have at the museum available for you, whether you're in Oregon, Washington, New Jersey, Montana, wherever you are. So you can be sure to look at that after Alan speaks. And again, I'll send it out in the post email or in the post PD email. So you have all of that information with you. So I'm going to pass it off to Paul, who is one of our partners on the session at the Holocaust Center for Humanity in Seattle.
Thanks so much, Amanda, and likewise, so excited to be here. From when I was in the classroom, Alan's work was some of the most captivating, fast-moving, most engaging texts that they had ever seen. And because of it, I just couldn't stop recommending it highly enough. So real privilege to be here and to be partnered with our partners in this, to be able to share and present this incredible program for you. So yeah, I'm the Director of Education for the Holocaust Center for Humanity in Seattle. And I'm going to put into chat a link to our website. And so many of you here do know of us and utilize our resources and programs, but just a quick plug for our Speakers Bureau and our virtual field trips as well, both of which really augment and deepen your lessons related to the Holocaust and making sure we express a commitment towards the human story and translating statistics into human lives. And then in addition, I wanted to indicate, of course, we have in Washington legislation that strongly encourages teaching about the Holocaust. And we have created best practices resources to support teachers. And that's all available on our website, which, yep, thank you, Akiva, for putting it in there for me. I really appreciate it. And last but not least, just to give a quick plug, this just came onto our site just a couple of days ago. We're going back to Poland from July 1st to July 10th, the Holocaust study trip. So please check out our website, and there's applications there. Washington teachers can get scholarships, but all teachers and others are cordially invited. We would love to go to Poland with you and explore some key sites and really deepen our education. That's all I've got, and now I'll pass it over to you, Jody and Jenny. Thank you.
Hi, so I will just start real quick. Is that okay, Jenny? I hope so. Hi, I'm Professor Jody Russell Manning. I'm at the Rowan Center for the Study of Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights. And Paul, I'm very jealous. I'm also taking a group of students this summer back to Europe on a trip to Germany and Poland. And I lived in Poland for many years, so I'm very jealous. So maybe I can join. We should talk someday. Anyway, so thank you for having me. I am the program director there at Rowan, and I will turn it over to our executive director. Thank you for having us, and I will let Jenny Rich take over. So thank you again, and so good to meet you, Alan. This is great.
Hey everyone, Jenny Rich. Jody already gave you a little bit of background about us. I will echo what everybody else said, though I already told Alan when I met him 5 minutes ago that I was having like an intense fangirl moment about being able to like have a moment to like say hi to him. I think this is amazing. So just a word about our center. We also do lots of public programs. We are at Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey. So for those of you who are from Seattle or Oregon, a little bit far away, it's 7:30 here, hitting bedtime for me and maybe some others. A lot of our programs are virtual, of course. I will put a link in the chat also for our primarily virtual master's program and certificate of graduate study in Holocaust and genocide education. So looking to offer teachers the ability to learn more content knowledge and think about pedagogical approaches for teaching Holocaust and other genocides. So I'll pop that link in the chat also if anyone's interested. All of our students are currently remote, so we're open to lots of possibilities. And this isn't the time for me to plug my program. And I will once again turn this back to Amanda and then to Alan. Welcome. Sorry.
Awesome. So we give Alan the most time possible. The only last two things I want to share with you is that there will be a post-session survey. So if you are requesting PDUs, whatever your professional development units are for your state, you must fill out that post-session survey. We will also be raffling off class sets of the book Refugee. In order to do that, you have to fill out a separate survey. All of this will be in the post-session email, so you don't have to worry about remembering all of that at the moment. So I just wanted to let everybody know that if you're like, PDUs, how do I get that? It's at the end. I will drop a link in the chat. So Alan, I'm going to turn it over to you so you have as much time as possible. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, your passion for this history and your writing. I'm so excited to learn from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Amanda. I'm thrilled to be with you guys. We've got a whole bunch of people on the Zoom chat. I really appreciate you making time for us, no matter what time of day it is, wherever you are in the US, or if we have some folks from outside the US joining us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for thinking about using Refugee in the classroom. I know a lot of schools have been doing this, and I see anecdotally through social media how many people are using it in the classroom, and that all I ever wanted with this book was for it to open hearts and minds to the plight of refugees past and present, and you guys are making that possible by putting it into the hands of young readers. Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen because I have a little PowerPoint thing to do here with you guys to show you some of the the genesis of this book. And then I thought that it should take about 20-25 minutes for that. And then after that, I would love to get into questions and talk about anything you guys want to talk about with Refugee. So let me go over here. I think I've got it here. All right, you guys see all the stack of books there. So hey everybody, I'm Alan Gratz. I'm the author of all the books that you see here on the screen. I'm going to talk more specifically about one of these books, Refugee, but first I just wanted to give a little bit more about me. I was born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I went to the University of Tennessee to study creative writing because I knew from when I was a very young boy, younger even than a lot of my readers, but around that age, that I wanted to grow up and be a writer. So I graduated. I did a lot of other jobs that had to do with writing and had to do with books while I worked on writing my own books. And then in 2006, I got my very first book published, that Samurai Shortstop, that book up there in the corner. And I've been really lucky to have about a book a year come out ever since then. Now I don't live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I live in a little town called Asheville in Western North Carolina. And this is my full-time job. I get to wake up in the morning. I get to come down here to my office, which is where I'm sitting right now, and work on writing books. And I think it is pretty much the greatest job in the world. So like I said, I'm going to talk specifically about Refugee tonight and how I got the idea for it, some of the things I learned along the way, and why I wrote it. And then after that, we'll get into your questions, so be hanging on to those and save those up for the second half of the program. So the story of Refugee began for me with the ship at the top of the screen. That's the MS St. Louis. That's a real picture of that ship, the real painting of it in a postcard version. The St. Louis was a real ship, and it left Nazi Germany in 1939 bound for Cuba with more than 900 Jewish refugees on board, many of whom had already been in concentration camps. But this was right before the war, and the Nazis had more prisoners than they had prison camps. So they would throw you in there, they would beat you, torture you, starve you, and then if you survived, they would kick you back out again to make room for new prisoners. And they would tell you, you have 2 weeks to get out of our country or we'll do it again. So people would buy the first ticket out of town that they could. And for many of them, it was this ship. The MS St. Louis sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. It pulls into Havana Harbor, and all the refugees have their suitcases in hand, and they're ready to go and live in Cuba. And the Cuban government said, we've changed our mind, you can't come in. And the Jewish refugees were like, but we filled out all our paperwork, we paid all of our fees, we sailed across the ocean to get here. If we go back to Germany, they're going to kill us. But the Cuban government said, not our problem, and wouldn't let them in. So the ship sails north up the east coast of the United States, and they beg the United States, please, will you let us in so we don't have to go back to Germany where they're going to kill us? And the United States says, no. So they sailed north to Canada, and they say, please, will you let us in so we don't have to go back to Germany where they're going to kill us? And Canada said no. So now they have nowhere to go. They're running out of food and water. They're running out of fuel for their ship. So they turn around and they go back to Europe. They don't have to go back to Germany, thankfully. They find 4 countries who agree to take them in, but 3 of those countries were right next door to Germany. And when World War II broke out about a month and a half later, most of those refugees were right in the way of Hitler and his armies, who captured them and took them back to concentration camps where many of them died. And none of them had to die if somebody somewhere said, we got this, we'll take you in, we'll give you refuge. So I knew I wanted to write about the MS St. Louis, but I wasn't sure who my characters would be and what the story of the family that I told would be on the ship. I knew the history. I knew the larger history, but what was going to be the personal stories? Who were my characters? I was still trying to figure all of this out when my family and I went on a vacation down to Florida. And one morning we got up and we said, hey, let's go for a walk on the beach. And that is where we found this. It was a raft that someone had used to come to the United States. You can see here in the pictures that it was homemade. It was built out of plywood and 2x6s. The outside of the raft, the blue part of that was sheets from sheets of metal from like a shed roof. The yellow stuff in the bottom left picture, that is the stuff that we buy at the hardware store in spray cans and uses insulation around windows and doors. They had sprayed it in the bottom of the raft and along the seams to keep the water out, which I thought was really clever. On the outside of the raft, in the top picture, you can see that there are empty gas cans because there was an engine mounted in the back that ran a propeller that's buried down there in the sand at the back of the boat. And inside, we found wet clothes and empty bottles of water, half-eaten bags of food, anything these folks could take with them to help them survive. No one was on board this raft when we found it. It was already abandoned. To this day, I don't know what happened to the people who were on it. I've never known. I hope they made it here safely. I don't know. I also don't know where they came from. My best guess has always been that they came from Cuba. That's the closest of the Caribbean countries to southern Florida, but that is still 90 miles away. I wouldn't want to go fishing in that thing, let alone take it that far across open sea, but that is exactly what someone had done to come here and have what we have. My family and I, we were stunned by this. We walked around it. We talked about it. It made us think about all the things that we took for granted. The roof over our heads, the food on our plates, the freedom and safety we enjoy as American citizens. And me personally, I was like, what am I doing? Why am I writing about refugees 75 years ago when we've got refugees right here, right now, 100 yards away from where I was sleeping last night? Why am I not telling that story? And of course, right around the same time, the news was filled with images of the Syrian Civil War and the Syrian refugee crisis. The Syrian Civil War started in 2011 and is still going on. The Syrian government is fighting with Syrian rebels. Kurdish rebels have tried to take over parts of the country. ISIS, terrorist group, has taken over parts of the country. Iran has joined the fight in support of the government. Russian fighters have dropped bombs on Syria. American battleships have fired missiles into Syria. And the people who are caught in the middle are the Syrian people. Since the beginning of the Syrian war, close to 12 million Syrians have lost their homes. 12 million is a big number. And I think it was Paul who was saying earlier on, taking numbers and statistics and making sense of them, putting them on a level that kids can understand is such a big part of our jobs. So I'll do the same for you. 12 million is more people than live in the entire city of New York, right? So the biggest city in the United States, 12 million is more than that. It's about 8.5 million people in New York City. It's more people than live in all but 6 US states. Only California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, and Pennsylvania have more people than the number of people who've lost their homes in Syria. Because this is, because a lot of you guys are up in Oregon and Washington State, I did a little Wikipediaing before this. 12 million, as I calculate it, is roughly the combined population of Oregon and Washington. It's actually like 11.8 or something, according to the numbers that I could find. So imagine that over the last 10 years, everybody, I know we have Amanda, I think is in New Jersey, everybody in New York City, or for you folks in the Pacific Northwest, every single person who lives in Washington and Oregon, every single person became homeless and had to find some new place to live. That is the kind of refugee crisis we would be dealing with here in the United States that they are dealing with over in the Middle East. Roughly half of those people, about 6 million people, have left their country looking for some other place to live. And many of them end up in refugee camps like the one in the bottom left picture. They're in countries next door like Jordan or Turkey, but many more people are pushing on to the European Union for safety and refuge. And maybe you've seen pictures like the one at the bottom right, with people wearing orange life vests crammed into black rubber rafts, trying to get across the Mediterranean Sea to places like Greece or Italy. But this is a really dangerous water crossing too. In 2016, at the height of the crisis, an estimated 5,000 people a year died trying to make that water crossing, and more are dying every year. And none of them had to die if somebody somewhere said, "We've got this, we'll take you in, we'll give you refuge." Okay, so now you can imagine what I'm thinking. First, I wanted to write a book about Jewish refugees. Then I wanted to write a book about Cuban refugees. Now I wanted to write a book about Syrian refugees. I was like, which of these books do I write first? They're all really important stories. And I was like, wait, why do I have to write 3 different books? What if I wrote one book and I put all 3 stories in it? And that is how Refugee was born. Refugee then is the story of 3 different kids Now, all these pictures are pictures that I found online. The picture at the bottom left is actually a picture of kids on the MS St. Louis. The other two are pictures of kids from those places, but don't really have a connection the way that that bottom left picture does, very specifically to its time and its place. All three of these kids are fictional. I made them up, but every single thing that happens to them really happened to someone on one of these journeys in one of these time periods. So it's the story of Joseph, who leaves Nazi Germany with his family and more than 900 other Jewish refugees on board the MS St. Louis, bound for freedom and safety in Cuba in the 1930s. It's the story of Isabel, who escapes Cuba in the 1990s with her family and her next door neighbor's family on board a raft very much like that one I found on the beach, bound for freedom and safety in Florida. And it's the story of Mahmoud, who leaves Syria on foot with his family to try and get to Germany for freedom and safety in the present day. And I weave all three of the stories together. So you get a chapter from Joseph, then a chapter from Isabel, then a chapter from Mahmoud, all the way out. So you can see the parallels in their lives. And in the end, so you can see how each of these three characters and their families are actually connected across the thousands of miles and the decades that separate them. And that, of course, is a big spoiler. If you haven't read the book or haven't finished the book, I don't want to spoil that here in case you haven't read it. I know a lot of people, I read the initial survey, a lot of folks who are attending tonight have read Refugee. Thank you. That means so much to me. But if you haven't, I didn't want to give away the big ending. So I'm going to skip over that part. But I wanted to talk more about some of the parallels that I found in my research that did make it into the book. So first off, each group is driven to flee their homeland by violence. In 1938, the Nazis carried out an organized pogrom against the Jews, ransacking and destroying Jewish homes, schools, businesses, and synagogues throughout Germany. Rioters destroyed 267 synagogues and damaged or destroyed more than 7,000 Jewish-owned businesses, and 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and imprisoned in German concentration camps. The event became known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, due to the shards of broken window glass that littered the streets the next morning. The government of Cuba called the 1990s the special period in time of peace, though in reality it was anything but. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, so too did the Soviet Union's economic support for Cuba. The Soviet Union had been sending Cuba large amounts of oil and food and machinery, and without anyone else to trade with, thanks to US embargoes, the people of Cuba began to starve. Cubans began to riot, and the government responded by attacking its own people with the military. And in Syria, of course, the government has been attacking its own people since the Civil War began as a part of the Arab Spring of 2011. Protesters were met with police and military violence, massive arrests, and a brutal crackdown. And millions of Syrians have since fled their country to escape the danger. Another parallel I saw was that in each of these struggles to get to freedom, refugees had to make dangerous water crossings. The voyage of the MS St. Louis was a comfortable one on the surface. By the captain's orders, the ship's stewards treated the Jewish passengers like human beings for the first time in many years for some of them, waiting on them hand and foot. The Jews enjoyed dances and films and shipboard games, and the ship's staff even rigged up a makeshift swimming pool for the children. But below decks, the captain had less control, and the men who worked in the engine rooms and as firemen harassed the Jews and raided their rooms. To alleviate the rioting in Cuba, Fidel Castro suddenly lifted the longstanding ban on leaving the country, and Cubans took to the ocean by the thousands on homemade rafts and makeshift boats. Many of these rafts were barely seaworthy, yet they were expected to carry the refugees 90 miles across the sea to the United States, through shipping lanes and storms and shark-infested waters. We'll never know for sure, but an estimated 3 out of every 5 people who left Cuba on board a raft in the 1990s died on that voyage. 3 out of every 5 people, they think. And Syrian refugees often try to cross the Mediterranean Sea on rafts, as I talked about earlier, leaving in the night when it's most dangerous, of course, with no one to guide them or help them when they face danger. And yet, and in yet another saddening parallel, each of these refugee groups was turned away along their journey again and again as different nations denied them entry for racist, nativist, monetary, or security reasons. There were surprising things I discovered along the way too, like the kind treatment of the Jews on board the MS St. Louis when the rule of the day in Germany was to deny Jews any rights, freedoms, or luxuries. For his kindness on board the ship and his dedication in finding a safe harbor for his Jewish refugees, Captain Gustav Schroeder was posthumously awarded the title of Righteous Among the Nations by the State of Israel. In the Cuban story, I was surprised to find out that CNN had been on the beaches filming refugees as they left Cuba for the United States. Fidel Castro made his announcement that people could leave via television, and the broadcast reached as far as Miami. So when people figured out what was happening and that people would be leaving in droves, the fledgling cable news network sent reporters and cameras to cover the exodus. And when I had thought of refugees before I began working on this book, I always thought of dusty, weary travelers with little else than a bag of clothes on their backs. But of course, in the present day, refugees carry cell phones with them to help them get where they're going. I was surprised to find pictures of refugees huddled not around campfires, but power strips, charging their cell phones so they could stay in touch with the smugglers they were in contact with on WhatsApp, or to plot their routes out on Google Maps, or figure out which direction to pray every day with an app called iSalam. So one thing I often ask young readers to do when talking about refugee, and you can do this with your own students, is to imagine for a moment that one day bombs start falling on their neighborhood. A lot of kids laugh when I say this in schools because the idea is so far-fetched and impossible. But that is exactly the way the people of Syria felt when the first bombs started falling on them in 2011. Theirs was a country much like ours, with libraries and movie theaters and sports stadiums and cars everywhere. People went to school and worked regular jobs and went to church. And then one day, bombs started falling, and their entire lives were turned upside down. Obviously, I hope this never happens to anyone anywhere. But imagine for a moment that this were to happen to you. Your country falls into a civil war. Maybe it's not too hard to begin to imagine that in the United States now. But imagine that your country falls into a civil war. Your house isn't destroyed, but a house down the street is. And then your school and a church, and maybe the hospital is hit. Other people are dying, but you're safe for now. But people start to leave. People start to leave, but you don't want to go. This is your home. Everything you own, everything you have worked for and built is in your house, here in this community. But still the bombs fall. How long do you wait before you finally decide to leave? Until the bomb actually hits your house and forces you out? So let's say that you are forced to leave at the last moment because you've held on as long as you can. So now you've only have time to fill one backpack when you leave, because you may have to carry it for days, for weeks, for months, across thousands of miles. What will you take with you when you can only take what you can carry? Where will you go? Somewhere else in your own country? But the bombs are falling everywhere. If you go to another country, will they let you in? Will you have to live for months or for years in a refugee camp while you wait for another country to finally say yes? And once you do get to a new country, do you speak the language? Does everyone practice the same religion you do? How will you make money? How do you get around from place to place without a car? If you had a degree or a certification that let you do your job in your home country, will they honor it in your new country? If you're in school, will they put you back in the same grade or make you take remedial work to catch up? If you're a kid and you move to a country with no child labor laws, do you have to get a job instead of going to school to help support your family? Will this new place ever be your home? Leaving your home and making this journey and settling someplace new is the hardest, most devastating thing you will ever do in your entire life. But you do it. You take everything with you, everything you own in a backpack, and you set out on the most dangerous, most trying journey of your entire life because you have hope. You hope for a new start, for allies along the way, for a country that will welcome you when you get there. You hope for a new future for you and your family, one without war and without starvation and without struggle. You hope you will never have to be a refugee ever again. And I hope that reading Refugee does for you what finding that raft on the beach did for me all those years ago. I hope that it takes something that might be invisible to you, the lives of refugees and the refugee crises in the world, past and present, and makes those things visible either again or perhaps for the first time. So I'm going to come back here and stop sharing the screen there and open things up for questions. I know you guys have been talking a lot about this. I saw a lot of the thoughts and questions that people have ahead of time, but I would love to jump in and see what you have now that you'd like to talk about.
All right, I'm going to say while we're doing that, if people could put their questions in the chat, and then Jenny, Jody, and Paul, if you want to look at those and start to pull them out. And I'll start off with the first question that I know so many teachers had put in the pre-session survey, having to do with trauma-informed approaches, SEL approaches, when teaching this book. So, I mean, unfortunately, I think so many of our students can relate to needing to pack up very quickly, especially on the West Coast with fires out here. That is something that is real for us. And so many of the teachers do work with students that are refugees themselves.
Sure.
So, not that I expect you to be an expert on this, but how have you seen teachers? How have you heard from teachers? How do you want teachers to work with student populations who may have their own traumatizing experiences that are so real and relevant to this content?
Sure, absolutely. I thought this was a really great question and a very thoughtful one. So obviously you want to be very sensitive to those kids in your classrooms who you know to have been through something like this. So if you know, for example, that you have kids who are refugees, who came to this country as refugees, whether this year while you are teaching them or previously, and you've got to be really sensitive to that. But I will say that the biggest response I've gotten from teachers telling me about kids in their classroom who are refugees and then sharing this book with the whole classroom is that what it has ended up doing is it actually, once if you have a student in your classroom who's a refugee, they often don't want to talk about what happened to them. Part of it is because of the politics in the United States. The word refugee has become such a hot button word, just the word itself. When my book first came out, my wife's not in the book business. She posted it on Facebook, like, here's my husband's new book. And all she did was show the cover of it with the word refugee on there. And like the very first comment was just blasting us for our politics. And all it was the word refugee on the cover. It didn't, they hadn't read it. They didn't know what I was saying about refugees. They didn't feel like they needed to hear what I had to say about refugees. All they knew was refugees, they didn't want them, right? And so they were going to blast me for this. And so I think a lot of refugee kids, they sense this. Their families have picked up on this and sense this. They feel this. They see it on the news. They hear it on the lips of people in their own towns. They don't want to admit or talk about their refugee status because they know it's such a politically charged word. But when kids are reading refugee in the classroom and they're talking about it and they're meeting Joseph and Isabel and Mahmoud and they're learning about their lives and their journeys, what happens is they begin to sympathize with these characters and they empathize with these characters and they start to talk about how they're rooting for these characters. And then the response I've gotten from teachers is that's when the refugees in the classroom raise their hand and say, I'm a refugee. That's when they feel that it's okay to talk about it because they've seen their classmates feel empathy for someone who's going through this situation for fictional characters. But now they feel like they can finally bring up their own experiences. And what I've heard from teachers is that it's a tremendous way of opening the door for those kids to speak up. Now, I think that a problem, of course, becomes you never want to call on a kid who is a refugee that you know to be a refugee and then have them come up and be the representative for refugees. That must be a decision that the child makes on their own, right? You do not want to put a kid in that position of having to represent for something or to say something they're uncomfortable talking about, right? But hopefully using refugee in the classroom will open that up. We'll show them that other people in the classroom do care about these characters, and that they might then show that same compassion for a real person they know in the classroom. So I would definitely say be sensitive to that, to triggering trauma with kids who've been through this kind of thing. Don't ask a kid to be that representative. Don't ask somebody to get up in front of the class, or to make them the representative for all refugees everywhere. Use my book for that. That's what the book is for. But hopefully through the conversation about refugees and these different crises, past and present, it will encourage those kids to speak up. If they don't, that's totally their call. But a lot of teachers have written to me and said that it has led to a number of people talking about this. I was in Houston, and I was doing a school visit, and I was with a smaller group of kids at lunch. Like, we were having, lunch together. It was some specially selected kids that the teachers had picked. And one of the kids raised her hand and said, "I'm from Honduras." And she said, "My dad is still," I'm sorry, I'm getting a little choked up because I remember this. She said, "My dad is still down there. And he always calls me on my birthday. And this year he didn't call me." And she said, "I don't know if he's okay. I don't know if he's walking north." This was, of course, when we were seeing so many of the groups of people walking from Central America, trying to get to the border, to the American southern border. She said, "I don't know if he's on the road. I don't know if he's safe. I don't know where he is or what's happening to him." And she was telling all of this in front of all these kids who had no idea. You could see on their faces they hadn't heard this story. But she felt comfortable to share that because we were all talking about refugees the world over. She felt like it was a safe space to talk about that because of the conversations we were already having about these fictional characters. So I hope that Refugee gives you those spaces in the classroom, and that it opens up those kinds of moments for your students. Again, don't put any kids on the spot, but if it does, I think it's really a great way for them to say, "Me too."
Thank you so much. That's such a rich response. I mean, it's so compelling in so many ways. There's so many different angles we could take that. There was a question that was also asked frequently in the pre-survey questions, and I know that I'm really interested in this question too, and that is your choice for the ending. Now, I don't want to give it away because many have indicated that
Right.
they are 75% in, or they're not quite done reading it and they can't wait to get to the end. But I just want to tell you, complimentary wise, first of all, up to this book, there was only one book that actually caused me to shed tears on pages, and that was The Book Thief towards the end.
Great book.
But this one too, it really choked me up the way that it, and again, I can't get into the end, but the choice for the end here. Why
Sure.
choosing here? Because of course we know that in the typical, if there's such a thing, typical refugee experience, that finding home is also as much, if not more, for many a challenge compared to the flight, right?
Sure,
And so
of course.
what choices did you make there?
Yeah, so I can talk about the end in generalities as well. I've got a lot of practice doing this, trying not to spoil the ending. But first of all, to your point about this being just part of the life of a refugee, I've heard it said. There was a professor at Berkeley, and I think I quote the professor in the author's note, that refugees live 3 lives. They live the life that they led before the crisis, right? The life that they expected to lead their whole lives. Then the crisis happens and they drives them out, and now they're leading a second life. Now suddenly they are refugees. They are living day to day on the road, trying to find a new home. And then when they find a new home, they begin their third life. And their third life is making a new home in a new country, and all the things I talked about at the end of that talk about the difficulties of moving to a new place, and understanding that most refugees do not get to choose the country they end up in. Many of them end up in a system that places them. So you might end up in Bosnia, and I don't even know what language they speak in Bosnia. I wouldn't, if you transplanted me from Asheville, North Carolina to Bosnia, I'd be totally lost. And I can only imagine what it is like for them as well. So yes, 3 lives at least for refugees. Why did I choose? So I have to show a little bit of that life beforehand so that you understand what what was normal. And a lot of times I have to do some of that through flashback. In particular, like with Mahmoud, I talk about the way that Syria looked before the Civil War even, because we have to pick up the story in the middle of the Civil War. So it's important for me to show what life was like even before that, so kids understand that it was very similar to the lives that we live here in the West, right? But then I have to be really quick. I have to make a quick pivot from the life before to the life of the refugee, because honestly, I'm trying to write books that kids can't put down. And so for me, the longer I wait, the cover says refugee. The back of the book says refugee. You know, this is a story about being a refugee. So I have to get to that refugee journey as quickly as possible. And for me, it's when they're driven out of their homes. And I have each of those three families driven for their homes by the second or third chapter. I have to be quick about this. I don't have much time. I want to grab kids and hold their attention. So then for me, what's the story as a writer? How do I make a beginning and a middle and an end? Well, a journey where there is an inciting incident that drives you out of your home, and then all these complications along the way as the middle of the story, and then finally arriving in a place. That's an end to that segment of a kid's life, of a family's life. Certainly there's much more to come. And I get so many kids who write to me and say, what happens next? What happens next? And I'm like, I don't know, you write that. And since we're among teachers here, that's a great assignment. If you work with this book, is to say, write the epilogue, right? Give me one chapter. Give me one chapter of what happens to each of these families after the book ends. Because kids keep coming to me and say, what happens next? What happens next? And I say, you tell me. I tell them, I don't know. I stopped the story there. What do you want to have happen? What do you think happens? And then I had, one of my favorite assignments when I was in 7th grade was we read Tuck Everlasting. And my teacher assigned us to write an epilogue for Tuck Everlasting. I remember that assignment to this day. Of course, I was, on my path to growing up to be a writer. So maybe I'm a little biased, but I loved that assignment, and I still think that's a great one especially for refugee. What happens next, right? Now, to talk about, Paul hinted at some bigger stuff at the end, and again, I don't want to spoil anything, but one of the things that I read in my research about refugees, and this happened in the past and in the present, and no matter what part of the world I read about, no matter what journey these refugees were taking, was that many people left home with more people than they made it to their final destination with. Right? Almost every refugee story, at least all of the journeys that I read about, many refugees lost people along the way. Maybe somebody got sick. Maybe somebody didn't have the right paperwork or not enough money to get across the border. Maybe a country separated a family at the border, as we had been doing for a little while. Maybe some people die. So along the way, families lose people on that journey. And along the way in refugee, each of my families, each of my groups loses someone. Again, without being too spoilery, but each of the families is going to lose at least one person along the way. And I have kids who write to me and they say, what happens? What happens to this person and this person, this person? And I say, I will never tell you. And it drives them nuts, but I do it for a reason. And I have a reason. My reason is because I read about so many refugee families that reach their final destination, their new home. It may not be their final destination, but their new home without everybody they left with. I tell the kids, that feeling that you have right now, that horrible concern that you have for a fictional character and that needing to know that fate. Now imagine that it's your little brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, your grandparent, or one of your parents. Imagine that it's real. Not just fictional, not just in a book, right? Imagine taking that feeling that you feel right now, that oh my gosh, I have to know what happens to X, one of my characters, right? One of my characters. Now imagine that that's somebody that you know and that it's real and that it's 1,000 times worse than what you feel right now because of this is a fictional character. And I said, that's why I will never answer that question, because I want you to feel the way that real refugees feel when they get to a place that they haven't brought everybody with them that they wanted to bring with them. Right. And so I did that on purpose. I made really deliberate choices in this book. When I turned in the book and I had characters who didn't make it a long way, my editor was like, no, you can't do this. You can't lose these characters along the way. It's too awful. And I said, that's what it's like. And how honest am I going to be about this journey if I don't represent that? Paul and I were talking before we came on here. I've written about the Holocaust, and we have a number of people here who are Holocaust educators. What kind of a book would it be about the Holocaust if everybody lived? Right? If we know that 6 million Jews, European Jews, died in the Holocaust, and you have a book where all the Jewish characters survive, what are we saying? That's to me not accurately representing what happened. I don't want to be super negative. I don't, and I want each of my stories to end with hope, but they have to be realistic. I told you guys earlier in that talk, 3 out of every 5 people they think died on that journey from Cuba to the United States. 3 out of every 5. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that 3 out of every 5 people on a raft died. Sometimes an entire raft would make it. Sometimes an entire raft would not. But if I didn't lose somebody on Isabel's journey, how honest would I be to that number, right? If all 7 people on the raft make it, 9, I think, if all 9 people on the raft make it, then what am I saying about how hard that journey really was, how deadly, how dangerous? So I made deliberate decisions, and there's some heavy stuff that happens in this, but that's what happens in life. And I'm not exaggerating it for excitement or for exoticism. I'm trying to match the numbers of the reality of the situation. I'm trying to turn those numbers into faces and names and people that we care about.
So Alan, I love how you just talked about empathy and wanting to get the students to feel that emotion that they feel towards characters, and then say, these aren't just characters, these are real people. And I think, empathy, when we saw it in the pre-session survey, is something that all teachers are like, some of their students really struggle with that aspect of it. So I just love how you're taking that fictional character and saying, stop, pause, time out, take that emotion, turn it towards real people are experiencing this. So I just wanted to, say that again for everybody who, heard it, but hear it once more.
And I saw in some of the comments before the session, but when you were doing the people were answering questions. I was an 8th grade English teacher, and I was an 8th grade English teacher on September 11th. And I've written a book about September 11th, Ground Zero, but I was a teacher that day. And I remember when we came back to school after the fact, like the next day or just later that week, and we were back in school. And as the English teacher, I was like, let's write about it, right? Let's write our thoughts about it. And I was devastated. Like many adults in the United States, I was just wrecked by it. I was removed from it. I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and taught in Knoxville, Tennessee. I didn't know anybody in the towers or in Pennsylvania, from the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania or at the Pentagon. But I, like most Americans, was just devastated. And so I, as an adult, was just wrecked. And so my class, they sat and they wrote quietly. And then we started to share what we had written. And we had just started, and I started us off, said, I'll start. And I was starting to read my thing. And we had some primitive laptops back then. And one of the kids had been loading a video the whole time, right? And it had finally loaded up. And so I'm right in the middle of doing my reading. And this, music video starts going on his computer. And he hops up and starts just jamming to it, right? Because he's an 8th grade boy. Right. And his computer went off playing music, and he's got to get up and score the cool points or the funny points for getting up and dancing. And I'm right in the middle of reading like my heartfelt, totally wrecked essay about 9/11, which happened 3 days ago. Right. And me as an adult, I was just on fire. Just like my first response was, I'm going to kill you. And I was just, what? Sherbs, turn it off. I remember the kid's name to this day. And that's my nickname. That's his nickname. I'm not going to give you his full name to protect the innocent. And I'm like, Sherbs, turn it off. Everybody close your computers. We're just going to sit quietly for the rest of the time and I'm going to go back to my desk, and you guys are going to sit quiet, because I was just really emotional. And afterward, I cooled down, and I had to remember they're 8th graders. They're middle schoolers. They don't understand how big a deal this is yet, right? That I had to remember that. And I didn't give him demerits. I didn't, scold him any further than that. I just had to kind of find my peace with it and be like the next day, like, let's start over and nobody load any videos. But with middle schoolers, who's really the core of what I write for upper elementary, middle school, above that as well. But middle school is kind of my peeps. I have to remember that middle schoolers are kids, but they are also becoming adults. And I think this is something that everybody needs to remember. You're going to have kids who don't seem to have any empathy with the characters in the story. This is where I'm going with this long anecdote. I'm sorry. But you're going to have kids who just feel like you're not getting through to them. I guarantee you are. They're listening. They may not be at a maturity level where they can deal with the emotions that they're feeling yet. They will get there. Some of them are totally there already. You know the kids in your classroom who can read a book about the Holocaust and they are just rapt because they know they understand the importance of it. They understand the enormity of it, and they're fascinated because they know that it's like the depths of human depravity, and they understand that. Other kids are just going to be, it just goes right over their head, right? But the more we can share with them, the more they're going to internalize that, and they will come to it. I really believe they will come to it. So I know that a lot of teachers are struggling with, like, how do I deal with the different empathy levels in the classroom? I think you just got to lay it out there. And I hope that Refugee gives you the platform to do that, to lay it out there. I tried to write it in a way that would keep even the most reluctant readers reading, that would make it action-packed so that it would entertain those kids, even if who even aren't in it, aren't just in it for the empathy. But I love the term young adults. I know we use young adult in literature for mostly like high school books, like for ages 16 and up. But I think that middle schoolers are really young adults in the sense that on the one hand, they can be playing foursquare or kickball out in the recess. They still want to go to recess, but then they can come back in the classroom and they can have real serious discussions about what it's like to be a refugee. And it's like a switch. They can flip it so fast. So I hope that you will not let the kids that it doesn't seem like it's getting through to them keep you from using Refugee in the classroom. I believe that it's getting through there, and that kids just have different maturity levels, and that they will come to it. That once you've talked about it with them, they'll come to it in their own time.
So well said. And so I definitely want to address one of the questions that was in here from a teacher earlier. And it's something that I particularly love about your books as a teacher as well, is how historically rooted they are. Obviously, best practices are to make sure that the information is accurate. And so the research that you do to make sure that these stories, although they're exaggerated in the sense that they're combined of people, but to know that they're actually rooted in real people's experiences is so valuable. So one person had asked, how do you research for your books, or specifically Refugee?
Sure. I can talk about it in general terms, but also specifically Refugee. So whenever I'm writing about a time and a place that I didn't live through, which is most of the things that I'm writing about, whether they're about World War II or the present day, I go to the library. That's my first stop. I know kind of what I want to write about. So I go and I check out as many books as I can about my subject. I come back here to my office, I sit down and I start to read and learn as much as I can. Now, I can't get everything from books, obviously, but that's where I start. So I try to get a good grounding in a time and a place and an event. Now with Refugee in particular, it was really challenging because I had 3 different time periods. And now certainly the 1930s, I had the most material about that. In fact, there's a book called The Voyage of the Damned that's specifically about the MS St. Louis, where it lists the names of each and every single passenger on board the MS St. Louis. It talks about who they were before they got on that ship, what happened to them while they were on that ship, and then their fates after they got off that ship. Like, the research around the MS St. Louis is really in depth. And so I had amazing resources for that. So books were my main source of information, about the MS St. Louis. Now, with the story about Isabel and the Cuban diaspora, for that we have very many Cuban Americans, and we've been receiving Cuban refugees since the revolution was in 1959, and so we've had refugees from Cuba coming over since the late 50s, early 60s. And so those are well documented. There are many books about that, but there's also actual documentaries. There are actual interviews with people who were on boats and rafts. And I was able to hear about it. Why is there a whole scene with sharks in that story? Because almost every single documentary I watched, they were like, and the sharks. They were all talking about the sharks, the sharks, the sharks, the sharks that circled their rafts, waiting for them to sink, waiting for the meals. So that was a huge source for me. And then with the story about the Syrian Civil War and the refugee crisis in the Middle East, that was happening while I was writing about it. So I had to pick a time. I actually picked a specific date. I can't remember now, but it was sometime in September. But I picked a specific date in the previous year, and I was able to find such incredible resources on newspaper and magazine sites. The journalists who were covering the Syrian Civil War and the refugee crisis have done amazing work. There were some some journalists who would travel with refugees. They would join them as soon as they started their journey within Syria and follow them all the way until they got to some destination like Germany or Sweden, where they were finally settled as refugees, walking with them the entire way and documenting those journeys. So I found a website, I was getting back to that date, where it was a sliding bar and it showed the different groups. I talked about all those different groups that were fighting in Syria, that still are, and trying to take it over. And day by day, they had different areas that they occupied. And you could move the slider back on this website. I think it was The Guardian, a newspaper in England. And they had this slider you could move back to show where things were on different days. And I picked a specific day. And I said, this is exactly where the opposing forces were that day. And so that journey that Mahmoud and his family take out of Syria is literally what Syria looked like that day that I wrote that that I set the story on. So and I looked at real maps on Google Maps to decide what roads they would take. So I'm not just saying they drove down this road and ran into somebody, and they drove down a made up road and ran into this person. I was actually like plotting out their story based on the other journeys that I'd read about refugees taking. I tried really hard to make sure that all of those places were the places that refugees journeyed through, and that all of the different things that happened to them are things, as I said, that happened to real refugees. So each of the research for each of these different stories was very different, heavily on books for the St. Louis, more on interviews with Boteros for Isabel's story and the Cuban story, and then the amazing reporting that's being done around the world. Al Jazeera was an incredible resource. Al Jazeera, of course, has covered that civil war and the refugee crisis like no other outlet. It's their account, in the same way that I used the New York Times heavily for Ground Zero and the Twin Towers. The New York Times was like, this is our account. We're going to get this right. And Al Jazeera, boy, oh boy, have been terrific. And of course, it gave me other perspectives. And that's a huge, huge thing for me when I'm writing. I cannot write from one perspective. I can't research from one perspective. If I'm writing about the Battle of Okinawa, which I did in Grenade, I can't just write from an American point of view. Oh my gosh, that would be so skewed. I need to know what the Japanese point of view was, and more importantly for that story, what the Okinawan civilians' point of view was, for the people who are caught in the middle. So for me, it's always a matter of, how can I get as many perspectives on this one situation as possible? And in particular, the perspectives of the people who were at the heart of it, the people who were affected by it most, not the people doing the affecting, but the people who were the victims of it.
So I think we're about at the last question point. Is that right?
Yeah, I
Amanda?
talk too much. I'm sorry. I talk a lot.
You don't, but I have I think we all would like to sit here for so much longer and have this conversation. But I'm honored to bring you this final question from a 10-year-old who is listening somewhere out there, who is very eager to know what your next book project is. I think that he speaks for every person on this Zoom when we say we would all like to know what you're working on now.
Well, it's funny. I think Amanda mentioned the go bags that a lot of people on the West Coast have for wildfires. I'm writing about climate change. I'm writing a book. Yep, it's called 2 Degrees, and it will come out next fall. And it is the story of 4 different kids. It's the story of a girl in Miami who is trying to survive a hurricane. It's a story of a girl in the Sierra Nevadas trying to survive a wildfire. And it's a story of two boys in Churchill, Manitoba, up in Canada, who are trying to survive when polar bears don't have sea ice to hunt on and come into town looking for their meals rather than going out on the ice. So I've got 3 different parts of North America: Churchill, Manitoba, the Sierra Nevadas in California, and Miami, Florida. And I'm talking about, and they all happen concurrently. All the stories are happening in the present day, right at the same moment. And of course, I'm trying to find a way to connect them the way that I often do with my characters. We'll see how it goes. I mean, I've written the first draft. Now I got to make sure that it actually is readable, and I'm working on the second draft. Yeah, I was reading about go bags and the wildfire situation. I've been doing a lot of research on that. That's my next novel. I actually have a book that will come out sooner than that. And so hopefully my 10-year-old fan will like this one as well. In August, so that book will probably come out in October of 2022, 2 Degrees. In August, I have a Captain America graphic novel that's coming out. I know, I got to write one. So Marvel and Scholastic are doing comic books for middle schoolers. Mm-hmm. And when I found this out, I was like, dudes, this is like the 2 parts of my life colliding. You've got to let me write one. But I didn't know what to pitch, right? They were already doing Ms. Marvel. They're doing Miles Morales Spider-Man. They're doing Shuri. They had a lot of they're doing younger characters from the Marvel universe and being heroes. And I was like, those are all awesome. But what could I do that would fit in with what I do? And I was like, well, how about like Captain America and Bucky fighting Nazis in World War II? So that was my pitch. They immediately jumped all over it. So it's called Captain America, the Ghost Army. And I got to bring in, because I can't help but do this, some real history. So the United States had a unit called the Ghost Army. And the Ghost Army was artists and musicians and advertising professionals who were especially recruited by the army to try and trick the Germans. So they made inflatable tanks. They made fake cutouts of airplanes. They recorded troop movements and played them back on loudspeakers that were strapped to the tops of trucks to try and fool the Germans into thinking we had more soldiers and more materiel in places that we didn't. And you got, like, if you look up the pictures of there's got like 4 guys carrying an inflatable tank over their heads, and it's just classic stuff. It's like cartoon stuff, but it was real, and they did it. And so they called it the Ghost Army. And so Cap and Bucky run into the US Ghost Army in Europe. But of course, because it's a comic book, the Nazis are also resurrecting dead soldiers and turning them into a literal ghost army that Captain America has to fight. So I get a literal ghost army, a metaphorical ghost army, and I get to have Captain America throwing his shield at a bunch of stuff. So I'm really stoked. I'm a huge comic book fan. And so, yeah, Captain America, the Ghost Army comes out in August. If that's successful, I hope they let me do a lot more. I'd love to do more Cap and World War II stories. And then 2 Degrees. And then for 2023, I'm looking at going back to World War II. I don't want to be away from World War II for too long. I have a lot of readers who are fans of my World War II stuff. So might go back to Pearl Harbor. Don't quote me on that. It's not a done deal, but that might be next.
So
oh my gosh,
think it's
Alan.
fair to say that if we didn't all really like love your work before, we are all now like diehard Alan Gratz fans.
Well,
for
thank
life.
you. Thank you guys so much for,
Amanda,
for considering using Refugee in the classroom. Thank you already to the people who are already doing that. And I hope that when you do your breakout sessions, I'm not going to be able to attend those. I'm flying to Germany tomorrow. So I'm trying to get packed for that. So I won't join you for the second part. I'm sorry. But I hope that when you do the breakout sessions, that those of you who are teaching Refugee in the classroom will talk about some of the things that you're doing. I love the epilogue idea. I often challenge kids to tell me what they would put in their backpack and have them write about that if they had to leave their house. On the West Coast, maybe that's already a question that's been answered because of the wildfires. But there are many other things I see people doing with timelines online and character studies. I hope that you'll share those. And if you're considering using Refugee in the classroom, I hope that you will. Again, my whole purpose in writing it was to open up kids' hearts and minds to the plight of refugees, past and present. And I think there's no better place to learn empathy for other people than in the pages of a book.
Alan, I want to thank you on behalf of, Jenny, Jody, Paul, and everyone here for being such an inspiration to all of us. I know I learned so much from you today, and we will let you go. You're getting all the praise in the chat.
I see that in the chat.
Mind
Thank you, guys. I
blown.
appreciate that. I'm sorry we
Have a
didn't get to all the
wonderful
questions.
trip.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you all. Please be safe. Stay sane. You guys are doing amazing work right now. I can't imagine being a teacher in the classroom right now with everything that's going on. You guys are doing awesome. Thank you. Keep it up.
Empathy.
I know, right? I know. I empathize with you. So keep up the great work. Thank you, guys.
All right. Also, as we transition to breakout rooms next, I'm going to share my screen just so you can see what we're going to do. I have created a Google Doc. I'll put it in the chat for you in a second. There are suggested prompts for you to talk about. You do not have to go over every single one of them, but we know that sometimes when you're in a breakout room, you're like, what do we speak about? Who goes first? I don't know. So there are prompts there for you. Then you'll see there is a very, very colorful, oh my God, what is this called? Chart, I guess. And in there, one of the things that you were all really wanting to get from this session was resources, lesson plans, ideas, strategies. And since you're only going to be in a breakout room with 5 to 6 other people, and we're not going to have time to come back together and all share out, in your breakout rooms, we'd like one person to be this note taker and put down links to articles, lesson plans, strategies, ideas that you have. And then afterwards, we will compile all of this and put it in a different Google Doc for you. So it's all organized. And it's a way that you can all share with each other without having to listen to 125 people all at once. Everybody understand what the next part of the session is, because we want to give you as much time in the breakout rooms as possible. All right, I am going to, in the chat, I made you all editors to it. So the number of your breakout group corresponds to the chart box that you should be writing in. All right. So I am going to create the breakout groups now. We'll all be going around, but we will come back at 5:55. Oh, I have to open the rooms. Oh my gosh. All of you are sitting here. Paul, I love seeing you in 2 separate.
It's the strangest thing. I don't know if anyone else can hear me, but I'm talking now. This is the second time this has happened where like the Zoom on my laptop like is completely like frozen, and I can hear everything, but I no longer can see or control any functions at all. So I was so paranoid that if I did something to it, it would stop the meeting. So I just opened this up on my phone. So I can't do anything else. It's so weird.
Is everybody who's left seeing something to click for the breakout room?
I wonder if people got up from their computer for a minute.
I know Laura is a dedicated person. She was so excited. We work with her a lot. And Forrest and Lewis. Oh, Karen's back.